Welcome to the 15-Minute Financial Feast podcast, bringing you 15-minute segments to help you retire with purpose on time. We're serving up food for thought and bread for the head. Are you hungry to learn? Here are your hosts, Mark Triplett and Troy Westendorf.
During this episode of the 15-Minute Financial Feast podcast, we're listening in on Troy Westendorf and Mark Triplett's Lunch and Learn series, where they covered a wide variety of retirement and tax planning strategies to help you retire with purpose on time.
Hey everyone,
Guys,
happy Tuesday to you. This is our
snowy Tuesday.
snowy Tuesday here anyway. Here in central Iowa, we're getting quite a bit of snow. For those of you in Colorado, you had it yesterday, I guess,
Yep.
or last night. And we always tend to get what you got about 12 hours to 24 hours later. So today's Lunch and Learn, we're gonna talk about the widow penalty. What is the widow penalty? How are senior widows and widowers impacted by this? What might likely happen to somebody who's impacted by the widow penalty? And more importantly, what can we do to prepare for that in the future? So that's where we're going to spend the majority of our Lunch and Learn today. This is our Lunch and Learn series. We take about 15 minutes to cover a specific topic, share a little food for thought with you, a little bread for the head. So with that, let's get started.
Yeah, so Mark, why don't you start it off? Why don't you explain to us what the widow penalty is and who would be most impacted by it?
So for folks who aren't familiar with this term, the widow penalty, it really refers to folks who become suddenly single in late stages in retirement. We actually work with quite a few widows who were widowed even before retirement.
Mm-hmm.
But in particular, when I talk about the widow penalty, I'm talking about folks who maybe are in their mid to late 80s and they have designed a lifestyle and an income around married filing jointly.
Right.
Okay. Husband and wife, their income's coming from distributions coming from Social Security, maybe a pension is included from one of them. We got Social Security pension. Maybe we have distributions from IRA accounts, pre-tax accounts. Yeah. Maybe they're not wanting to take them, but they're forced to because the required minimum distributions on those pre-tax accounts are forcing distributions out of those IRAs. Okay. But they're married filing jointly. So their tax rates are based on married filing jointly. Whether their Social Security benefits are taxed, the provisional income is based on married couples filing jointly. Their Medicare premiums are based off of married filing jointly. And then when one of them passes and the other one becomes suddenly single, all of a sudden their income doesn't typically drop in half. It may drop a little bit, but they have this income from Social Security, pension, if they're fortunate enough to have one, forced distributions of pre-tax accounts like IRAs, 401ks, and other IOUs to the IRS, and all of that income being forced through a single filer now instead of a married filing jointly can have a tremendous impact on things like the taxes, the amount of tax that you pay. They drive. Single filers have lower tax brackets, so they hit higher tax rates faster. The provisional income calculation, which determines whether you're going to pay taxes on your Social Security, is lower for single filers. And so now it's likely that a larger percentage of your Social Security benefits are going to be subject to tax and at a higher tax rate because we just talked about your single filers have lower tax thresholds to hit those higher brackets. And last but not least, Medicare premium surcharges. So the premiums are the income levels, the modified adjusted gross income levels at which you are forced to pay what's called IRMA, income related monthly adjustment amount, can be impacted. And so you can end up with a widow or a widower who all of a sudden is slapped with a lot of additional taxes and even penalties on their entitlement programs. Right.
Because they're single pay, right?
Correct. Yep. Because we went from married filing joint tax status to single filer. Yeah. And when folks defer taxes early in retirement, they may be actually setting themselves up for a problem later on. We hear a lot of CPAs and HR departments at your workplace, or even financial advisors saying defer, keep deferring taxes. Yeah. But what happens when we do that? Why do so many set themselves up for a tax problem later?
Well, they're encouraged so much by this, like you said, by financial advisors are doing it, CPAs are doing it, the federal government's doing it. They're encouraging us to defer taxes, delay, we get to retirement, and all of a sudden we have a 401k that we've been saving throughout our working years, and everything's taxable. So now we have a tax problem. No one's talked about, we always talk about tax equilibrium. Let's have a balance so we're not getting hammered with taxes at retirement. But nobody really talks about it. And then we're stuck with all this taxable income. We don't know what tax rates are going to be 5 years, 10 years, 15 years down the road. But we're pretty confident they're going to be higher.
Yeah,
So
what's
now we have a
what's
tax
the likelihood of
problem.
them going?
Yeah.
Tax
We're
rates
looking
going
at
down.
a $1 trillion stimulus package going out the door, and more to be talked about.
And when you say tax equilibrium, I think of like one of those old-fashioned scales.
Yeah.
If you load up one side, it drops down and the other side goes up.
Yeah.
And oftentimes what we find are folks are feeling really good about themselves early in retirement because they're spending all of their after-tax money, savings in the bank, things like that. Or they even spend their Roth IRA money and they pay very little in taxes early in retirement.
Yep.
They went from earning an income, paying taxes, to being retired, paying very little taxes, deferring all their taxation until later, feeling really, really confident and good about themselves. But what they're actually doing is tipping that scale.
Yeah.
They're setting themselves up to have a massive amount of taxable distributions later in retirement, which can impact the widow penalty.
Yeah, the scale's no longer sitting in the middle, kind of floating back and forth. It's just tipped.
Yep, absolutely.
And we see it, unfortunately, quite often anymore. So what are some of the things that folks can do now to perhaps minimize the widow penalty for their surviving spouse?
Well, so one of the things that we might suggest to folks that we're beginning that planning stage with is to find ways to optimize Social Security. So optimize Social Security benefits for the household. That often means that maybe one spouse is delaying benefits and the other spouse might be even claiming early, but coordinating those benefits for the better of the household. And what that's going to do is allow us to maybe push off some of those Social Security benefits, which are tax advantage, government backed and inflation adjusted, push those off and maybe spend some of our pre-tax money early on, right? So if somebody retires, say they retire at 65, but to optimize Social Security, one of the spouses delays to age 70. Well, they have to fill that gap between 65 and 70.
Right.
What are we going to use? Well, we're probably going to spend some of the pre-tax money. We might actually have them distribute some of their IRA or their 401k to fill up those tax brackets and spend some of that pre-tax money now. We might even do some Roth conversions. And if it makes sense, maybe do some Roth conversions, because Roth IRA distributions later in retirement do not impact provisional income, which impacts whether you pay taxes on Social Security. So we can immunize ourselves from some of those tax problems as a married couple, but also to avoid or mitigate the widow penalty by being smart about how and when we pay taxes. So optimize Social Security, spend some of that pre-tax money earlier in retirement so that you don't force it out later on, creating tax equilibrium, maybe even doing some Roth conversions so that you end up building up a pile of never taxed money to be used later on in retirement that won't impact the widow's penalty, it won't impact Social Security and Medicare premiums. And last, really set yourself in a position where you have the ability to blend out of different types of taxable income.
Absolutely.
So have some pre-tax, accounts like IRAs and 401ks, but not your overwhelming majority of your retirement resources be that. Have some in after-tax accounts, which are typically invested and have capital gains treatment as opposed to income tax treatment. And then have some of that money in never taxed accounts like Roth IRAs, where it doesn't impact any of it. Then you can blend from each of those, have the income that you want, but keep your tax rate down, manageable, and be a little bit more forward thinking as opposed to kicking the can down the road to one day wake up and be stuck in a position where all you have is taxable income.
Yeah.
So what steps should somebody maybe take right now if they're concerned that they or their spouse might get in a position where they're impacted by the widow penalty, maybe in the later stages of retirement?
Right. I think the biggest part for that is to come up with a plan. Be committed to a plan. Plans may change, but if you have no plan in place, where are we going to go? So when someone goes through our process, they know we have a plan in place. So we have a process. We bring them through our process, and we can look for these little areas of concern that we can maybe fix now or start to repair rather than waiting till down the road. And also we have this problem and we got very little time to react. So I think having the plan, committing to a plan, and then just allowing us to look at the plan and say, hey, here's an issue with maybe inflation. Maybe they didn't calculate inflation, which we know a lot of them don't do. So expenses are higher. They don't look at the taxes. So maybe we look at the taxes. Maybe we have opportunities for Roth conversions, which we've done several times this year. And just like you said, so we have options to take from one place that's maybe not taxable versus taxable. Maybe not spending all of our savings up front. You mentioned that. We have clients that are thinking possibly they just use their savings, keep the tax rate low, and don't really look at long-term effects of all the taxable dollars that they have saved. So I think that's probably the biggest thing, Mark, just committing to a plan, sticking to that plan. And then, like we do here, we review the plan annually. We make the little changes that need to be made on an annual basis. If changes need to be made, we can see it, we can react, rather than waiting down the road and having, oh no, what did I just do for the last 10 years?
That's a good point. I mean, there are a lot of seemingly insignificant little minor adjustments that can be made that by themselves may not seem like that impactful, but cumulatively together over time, compounded, can make a huge impact. And so any one of those actions by themselves might get brushed off like, oh, it's no big deal. But when you start combining all of these actions together and you take the cumulative benefit of taking those actions over time, it can make a huge impact on whether or not you live in abundance and pay less in taxes, or you are forced into a position where your tax rates are higher and you may possibly run out of money. So committing to plan for sure. That plan will change. We know that because lifestyles change, tax rates change, rates of return are vary, people's lifestyles change over time. But just having that roadmap in place is kind of like setting the GPS on or the GPS in your car, setting that GPS to a destination. We know where we're headed. Now we can make decisions on how best to get there. And if roadblocks come up, you recalculate and you get around it. If you don't know where you're going to begin with, it's really hard to make good, sound financial decisions about how best to get there because we haven't identified where we're headed. And I think that's really, really important for folks that haven't gone through that process. Now, our clients have been through that process. We annually review that so that they can make seemingly insignificant adjustments that don't really impact their life that much.
Yeah, and they seem insignificant, but we have the I guess we have the opportunity and the tools to actually look at the plan, and we can see, wow, 10, 15 years down the road, this has a big impact by this little thing that we're starting over here. For maybe the next 3 or 4 years we do this, has a major impact 15 to 20 years down the road.
Yeah, and that's the benefit of using a tool like Retirement Analyzer that we use at our office to be able to pull all the resources together to map out that lifestyle, adjust it for inflation appropriately, to account for taxes, and then really look for potential issues that might come up or opportunities that have been missed and determine what actions are going to make an impact before anything is actually done. It's all stress tested. Right. So before an action is actually taken, we've already put it through the ringer and said, if we do this, what type of benefit or impact will that have? Is it a positive impact? Great. If it's not, then we won't recommend that action. So, and then, it's kind of like, imagine the reviews are a little bit like, I always think like, Highway 69 out here runs through the country, runs through town. It's a 55 mile, right? It's a 55 mile an hour road. Right. So everybody's driving 60 on it, 5 miles over. So I'll get pulled over. Like you're going really slow. And that road is old. It's been repaved and mended, and there are all kinds of cracks and variations in that road. And if you keep your hands on 10 and 2 and your eyes looking forward down through the windshield and just make those tiny adjustments, every so many seconds, you're making these little adjustments. You're just automatically doing it. Your body just does it. Everything feels smooth, and the folks in the back seat just enjoy themselves and enjoy the ride. If you take your hands off the wheel and you turn around and you start talking to the people in the back seat, and then you turn around like 5 seconds later, you're veering off the road and you have to yank the wheel. And now everybody knows that there's a problem. This is why it's so important that not only have a plan and commit to planning, the process of planning, but to revisit that on a reoccurring basis to make those tiny adjustments so that the ride is smoother as opposed to having to jerk the wheel 5 years down the road because you're veering off course. So, but as far as the widow's penalty goes, with a little planning, a little foresight, really thinking through what could we do today that might impact us 15, 20, 25 years from now, or impact our surviving spouse 15, 20, 25 years from now? What can we do today? And actually taking some of those little seemingly insignificant actions can really make a big impact.
Absolutely.
And make everybody's future a little bit brighter.
Yeah.
So hopefully you enjoyed the visit today, our talk today. That's it for this show. Next week, we're going to be talking about getting financially and physically fit in 2021, kind of a New Year's resolution theme, not just financially, but also physically. A lot of our clients, a lot of people we talk to are not concerned. That's the wrong word, but they're passionate about their health.
Yeah,
that is something that they really want to keep on top of in their post-working years, and those of you that aren't retired yet in your pre-working years. So we're going to talk about some of that, things that you can do to stay healthy. Absolutely. And also both physically and financially.
I think it's important. We mentioned that quite a few times with our clients. It's important to stay healthy. You don't want to get to retirement years, have your nest egg to be able to do what you want to do, and then
not be able to do it. Yeah, right.
So,
thanks for joining us. Remember, every dollar has a purpose.
Every dollar has a timeline.
Go out and retire with purpose.
And on time.
On time. See you next week.
See you guys. Have a good week.
You've been listening to the 15-Minute Financial Feast podcast. Remember, every dollar has a purpose and every dollar has a timeline. If you have questions about today's topic, schedule a call with a team member. Visit www.mypt5.com. Until next time, be sure you're taking steps to retire with purpose on time. Mark Triplett is an investment advisor representative of and advisory services offered through Royal Fund Management, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Nothing contained in this program should be considered an offer to buy or sell securities. Different investments have different risks associated with them, and not all investments are appropriate for all investors.